All righty. All right, let's move over into the intros. And Jake, do you want to kick us off?
Yep, I'll kick it off. Hey everyone, super excited to be here. My name is Jake Levinger. I am the marketing ops manager at Retool currently. And I guess a little fun fact, before moving into the Bay Area and working in tech, I worked at a brewery back in my home state of Texas.
Hey, I'm Trevor. I lead go-to-market systems at Miro, and I don't have a cool fact like running a brewery or anything like that, but I like to play sports. I like to play golf and basketball in my free time.
Yeah, and I'm Aclan. I'm PandaDoc's marketing ops manager. I guess a fun fact is I was a competitive swimmer growing up, so I'm sure the corporate lingo swim lanes will pop up throughout this next 45 minutes or so. Carries a different meaning for me.
Love it. And I'm Breezy. I'm the head of growth at Correlated. And fun fact about me, I used to be a competitive marathon runner. And so I am well equipped now for the business world due to the strenuous training that I had back in my marathon days. So as you can see, we have an awesome lineup of folks here and from some really amazing product-led companies. Just a quick intro on Correlated. So Correlated is a revenue expansion platform for SaaS sales and revenue teams. Basically what we do is we help try to enable your sales and revenue teams with the product usage data that they need to actually do their job well. So with that, let's kick it off. So just a quick overview slide about what we're going to talk about today. But feel free if you have questions or things that are top of mind for you. We're definitely open to talking about, some other topics either related to these or jump into some other discussions. So as far as that goes, we're going to start off with talking about sales-led versus product-led. What are some of the differences there, and especially on the ops side? As far as the PLG tech stack goes, what kind of things should you add there, and what could kind of complete your tech stack? What are some of those product insights that are helpful, getting that actionable data to your team, and how to act on that data? So with that, let's kick it off and head into sales-led versus product-led. And I'm going to kick it off starting with Trevor. If you don't mind giving kind of your insights on, what are some of the differences, especially on the ops side, and thinking about sales-led versus a product-led company.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we had a slide somewhere that Slack has 643 or 346 sales reps. So most product-led companies are using some type of sales-led motion as well too. But from my side, really, I think all of these motions are led by the product and led by the product data. So with my team, I focus mostly on what's the data needed, and what formulas need to be drawn on that data for us to then make our next action. And that's really how I kind of frame each one of these problems and look at these problems. But with that said, I think everyone has kind of a different definition of sales-led and of product-led. So I'd love to open up to Jake and John and figure out kind of where we all sit with these different definitions and dive in a little bit further.
I can piggyback on that, and just to kind of restate the question, give a little bit of my context. I've been in marketing ops for the majority of my career. Most of it has been spent at sales-led or marketing-led companies. Most notable is at Carta for almost 2 years in my last role. And Retool is my first kind of foray into product-led marketing operations. And I think the biggest thing I've noticed that's interesting is that at the highest level, especially as it pertains to marketing ops specifically, the challenges that or problems you need to overcome aren't super different. So lead scoring is universal to sales and product-led, formulating a life cycle if you have sales reps to figure out how leads flow through the system is universal to sales and product-led. But kind of to what Trevor said, the data is super interesting because, at my time at Carta, for example, you couldn't really access the platform until you were a customer, and then we had access to all the data, and that was super valuable then. But here at Retool, we have free trial driven top of funnel. we can see all that data that people are using or what they're doing in the product or not doing, and kind of tailor conversations really early and often to that. And then also it kind of permeates the entirety of our sales funnel. And yeah, we kind of lead data first. I think, and then kind of secondarily, we lead like with the customer experience first.
Yeah, and I think something that's really resonant with at least my experience at PandaDoc is just what Jake said. The problem set isn't different between sales and PLG. When it comes to like PLG and sales led, it's really how do we get more specific on this idea of an inbound led organization. Really, the difference is like, what kind of human resources do you deploy on certain audiences? When is it time to deploy a sales rep versus time to deploy basically a product manager and in-app messaging or maybe email communications? So as Jake mentioned, a lot of that comes down to some of the universal tenets of marketing. Like, can you identify your audience properly? Do you understand when and why we send certain messaging to this audience? Doesn't really matter who's on the other end of that communication. Again, whether it's a sales rep or a potential for a self-serve conversion. It comes down to understanding which audience is most appropriate for a sales rep versus, again, the product.
Do you find that there's like skews in the data that drive you one way or the other? Or do you think it's all like product specific, or like how do you make that distinction between, you know, what should go to a human or what should go to like a tool like Outreach?
Yeah, so to be specific, like a tool like Outreach, I know at PandaDoc we use SalesLoft. So whether you get your emails from SalesLoft versus your emails from HubSpot or Marketo, it again comes down to like audience identification. So specifically, Trevor, your question, like I know early on, at least in my career at PandaDoc, the joke was we had sales reps and their biggest competitor, it wasn't DocuSign or Proposify or anything, but rather just PandaDoc's own in-app self-serve function. And then that's when we realized, like, all right, let's start with the basics. What company sizes, what industries strongly correlate with a self-serve funnel. And for us, it wasn't really rocket science. We found that, all right, these one seat users, these one person company sizes, why are we deploying sales reps, very expensive sales resources on one seat deals when we know that they're going to likely convert through the product anyway? And then once you start to with your very like alpha level of segmentation, that's when you can start exploring really more complex, more powerful levers for segmentation. So Jake's hinting at lead scoring. I know there's at PandaDoc we're exploring potential like size of prize measurements, like with not just company sizes, but rather team sizes for our product. So that's where you can get far more sophisticated and a lot more custom to what your product can offer. But basic firmographic data is like where we started.
I can also.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, that's super. I think it's a really detailed answer. I think to kind of piggyback on that, I think the most interesting thing about, kind of answering the question, like, who goes where, which leads go to which people, the lines get super blurry, especially in product led. Like in sales led, it's pretty cut and dry. It's like, is this lead a viable selling opportunity? Yes, no. And if no, it's, myriad of reasons and kind of things you can do to nurture and follow up in them. But in a product led world, it's someone may not be a good fit for an enterprise sale, but they can still be a great fit for a self-serve path. And, how do you, best allocate resources to, to say, hey, like, let's, take the cream off the top of people that are going to be enterprise and just, have humans work those? Or does it make sense to just start having humans talk to more people and just help them along the way in their journey, do the best thing for the customer, whether that's an enterprise plan, a self-serve plan, what have you. So I think that's where it gets blurry, and that's kind of where it really, that's where it can be really bespoke based on what company you're at.
We've always used like employee size or like the amount of employees at a customer to like determine that threshold for us.
This is not.
What's that? Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like the employee count has always been kind of in like the threshold for us of like, how badly do you need a human to talk to you, to your point. That's interesting to hear a few other approaches as well.
I'm curious who's, I just tossed this in. Okay, I see Algolia. Who's using PQL today? Are most people on the call using a PQL score today, product qualified lead score, or thinking about that? I know generally like the start to a PQL is like people will just say, okay, a product sign up is a PQL, and then usually kind of advances from there. Just curious if anybody's using that. Okay, looks like some yes, some no in the chat. What about you, either Trevor, Jen, Sydney's better.
Yeah, we have similar things. I think like for us, like when you reach a certain usage of our platform, and then like I went to mention the employee count. So if you reach basically this usage threshold and you have a certain amount of employees at your company, we'll route kind of your lead specific places, whether it's to like a marketing automation platform or whether it's to a rep to speak with you. So we call them MQLs, probably just because marketing wants more recognition, but I think they're just like the same thing as a PQL.
Gotcha. All right, cool. All right, let's shift through. So you'd already talked on this one exact slide, but yeah, 96% of PLG companies have sales teams. I think that's sometimes surprising to a lot of people. So I always think it's just an interesting stat to pull up. There's generally like, the first thought is that there's this kind of disconnect. It's either like you're PLG or you do sales, but it's actually most commonly a combination of both of those. But kind of diving, and we started to talk a little bit about tech stack here, but let's dive in a little bit further. So thinking about your tech stack, when you're a product-led company, and what are some of those gaps that you feel like are crucial? I know, Jake, you talked a little bit about the onboarding experience and maybe needing some tooling there. Maybe we can kick it off with you.
Yeah, I think just at a higher level, I mean, kind of back to the original, like what's the difference between sales led and product led? Like, in companies that worked in the past that are sales led, your tech stack is usually pretty static. You need some sort of market automation platform, either Marketo or HubSpot or Pardot. You need some sort of CRM, usually Salesforce. And then there's a lot of ancillary tools that you can kind of layer on top of that. But more or less, those are the two biggest like kind of foundational pieces you need. I guess you could argue that like a third-party enrichment, like a Clearbit or ZoomInfo is as well. One of the biggest kind of sea changes I encountered here at Retool was the fact that just the data is so much more valuable than the actual systems and processes. So it's much more instead of a sales letter where you're kind of architecting a life cycle based on the stack that you get, it's the other way around. Like the data and the go-to-market motion should dictate how you create your tech stack and build around it. So when I joined, a little over a year ago, we had Segment, we had Salesforce, and then we had a few other kind of ancillary tools. And what I really came in and wanted to figure out was a way to just kind of bridge some of these gaps and not disrupt the flow of data, not really change the flow of data and how we in our process, but more so just kind of put some more robust foundations in place. So for us, that was HubSpot. So we have Segment, HubSpot, Salesforce, Intercom, Clearbit, and then the other piece is given that the product-led data is super valuable for any company, having a warehouse or someplace you can kind of query that data in real time is really valuable. For us, we have BigQuery, and I was really lucky that the person that joined, was kind of a manager of Stack before I joined, did a phenomenal job setting up our warehouse. And so for us, any data that we couldn't get directly piped into HubSpot through Segment, like computational data or like health score type data or things like that, we use a tool called High Touch, reverse ETL tool. Census is another type of that, and we can kind of fill in all the gaps that the gaps with actual product data in using these types of tools. So that's kind of some of the nuances between like the sales at tech stacks that I've worked on and what we have here at Retool.
I saw you unmute there for a second, Jan. You want to jump in? You looked excited.
I double clicked, my bad. I would say like, even without naming names, that's exactly, call it the business case coverage that I would echo. Like, do you have a marketing automation platform? Do you have a CRM? Especially if you want to very clearly delineate what is owned by sales versus what is owned by the product. And through a marketing automation platform, like that's what you can use to send like your marketing emails. Part of that challenge is making sure that your marketing team knows what to do with this data, right? Especially in a PLG company, there's maybe TMI with what kind of signals you can send to a marketing team. So part of it is also part of this discovery of like, how do I deploy my marketing automation platform to capitalize on this in-app activity? You want to prioritize like which of these signals are actually, again, I'll use the word correlate with different like potential to self-serve on their own. And again, that will help paint you, like, call it the white space of what should really belong to a sales rep, where they can do further discovery and do things that a marketing team can't do at scale. So for redundancy, PandaDoc has a very, very similar tech stack: HubSpot, Segment, Salesforce, and for completionist sake, for the sales team and their outreach, they're using SalesLoft. So hopefully that paints the parallel of whether it's a sales rep sending an email versus your marketing team. I know in the past, we also had Intercom as like the in-app cues for our product marketing team to help encourage the right in-app behavior that would ultimately drive someone to pay with a credit card. So part of it is data warehousing, and then a part of it is the like more fun like orchestration and go-to-market tools. And hopefully none of them are a shock, but they all cover the same business case.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think like there's there's two lenses to look at it from my perspective. One is like, when you're starting, what do you need? And like during this conversation, I wrote down some stuff here, and the first thing I wrote was like product to sales to money. Like that's what you need initially, kind of, right? And then like you grow into a place where you have like marketing automation platform, whether that's HubSpot or something else, and you have your product data flowing into there and to Salesforce, so that your reps are able to easily act upon things. And then hopefully your company gets to a size where it's big enough that you need this data warehouse to hold all this information in. And then a lot of those transformations or those formulas that you're running in your HubSpot or in your Salesforce are now kind of happening in your ETL or in your data warehouse, and you're ETLing that in, or however you may be doing that. I think like that's kind of the level of maturity that I've seen folks go through with the tech stack. And then obviously there's a myriad of tools to add on to efficiencies or to take manual pieces away from reps. But I think those three things I've seen always kind of remain the same despite the growth.
Yeah, I put in this overview slide, and you know, in some ways it's like too complex, and in some ways it's too simplistic. I think probably like based on kind of what you guys are hitting on, which is like the scale to which you have today and the growth of your company. But I think some of the things that are important, especially in product led, is first of all, collecting all that product usage data. Most likely any product led team is doing that today. It's just a matter of where does that data live? And a lot of times it's not living with the revenue team. So I think that's one of the struggles. I think one of the ways to enable that we see a lot is teams start building these different like BI dashboards using Looker mode. I do think one thing that's a little bit hard with that is that if you think of like a salesperson, they're probably not, super, maybe not super comfortable, or even if they are super comfortable, just not super likely to go constantly be living in like a BI dashboard. But I do think that's possible. And then the other thing that we're doing over here at Correlated is kind of pulling together those insights. So both the product usage data and that could live, in Segment or something like that. So you can plug directly in there, or on like the data warehouse side, and kind of pairing that up with what would be like your more classic revenue team data. So, demographic, firmographic, what account is there, what are the user, what are, all that data that we'd normally use, and kind of pairing that up with that product usage. And then I think the other thing you guys are all kind of hitting on too is those downstream tools, right? So whether that's marketing automation downstream tools, so getting those insights, into HubSpot and being able to kick off automations there, or getting them into things like Outreach, Salesloft. If your team is working out of Slack, if your team is working out of using Salesforce tasks, kind of pushing those into the places where you can actually act on that data. So first of all is getting all of the data, then getting it in the right formats, and then being able to kind of push it and use it in the right places. Any other closing thoughts here? I mean, the next topic we're going to jump into is talking about what data do we actually need? But first I want to open it up and make sure anybody, if you have any questions or thoughts, or if any of the three of you want to dive in with anything on that.
I think the only thing I would add is this whole decision you make here, or these walk, crawl, run is all based on the talent that you have, or what you want to hire for, because each one of these is going to require a different set of skill set for your team, and it's going to be relevant for a couple of years, and then it's probably not going to be relevant anymore. So it's how you need. It's very difficult to determine which one, and I'm not saying one's more correct than another, but these paths are multiple different paths you can take. So there's all these great tools like Census and High Touch out there that makes this very easy. My team at Miro chose Trade.io, which is simple as well, but not that simple. But so that took a little bit more technical skill set to hire for, which a lot of other folks may just want that kind of in the ops side where it can be managed there. So that's the only thing kind of I would add to this is you can't really win with the Snowflake Redshift model if you don't have the technical capacity to keep that where it needs to be and keep the pipeline built. So you need to hire for that in addition to the investment in the software.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Are others on the call? I'm curious, are others on this call using things like Looker mode on your teams and starting to model that data? Is your team pushing any product insights into your CRM? I'm curious what level people are at today, or if this is sort of like a pipe dream for you. Tableau, okay, nice.
A bit of a shameless plug, but we use Retool for some of that stuff internally.
Oh, nice.
Mostly in lieu of Looker or Mode to build kind of dashboard models. We're just aggregating a ton of different data and just having it in one place.
Very cool. Nice.
And one of the things we're trying to build is for our account managers, in Looker, here's your book of business. Here's with red, yellow, green of has usage gone up? Has employees that are using it gone up? Boards created gone up? All this different stuff. So every time they log in, they can see their 100 accounts and be like, all right, what's good and what's bad, and what opportunities do I have open against this, basically. But that's a lot harder than it is to say in the 30-second blurb that I just gave.
Yeah, where are they accessing that today?
Everything they're doing is in Salesforce, so we're just creating views for them within Salesforce to look at these Looker dashboards. Got it.
Okay, cool. Sandra, I see your note in there as well too. I think one way people generally start to get this into their CRM, if it's in a data warehouse, is most likely going to be Census or High Touch. That's going to be your go-to there to get some data in. And then at some point, you'll probably want to see more of what is the change in that data? How can I, trigger that data, actually do something with it? And that's, where you start to add a different tool like Correlated or something around that into your set too.
Yeah, we just create, Sandra, we just created another object in Salesforce, and it's a product object. We just have all the product data on that object. So now anyone who's in there can report on it, or we can use it with Outreach or anything like that as well too. So one way to kind of inch into the deep end.
Awesome. All right, let's jump in. All right. The only way to make this data actionable and to make it useful for your team is to think about what data do you actually need, and getting hopefully getting the answer to that question correct, or at least a starting place to kind of kick things off for your team. So on that, how do each of the three of you think about what is going to be important for the data that your team needs, and understanding what your needs are?
I can kick this off. I mean, I think the simplest way to think about what you need is just think about whatever will make the customer experience and customer journey better for the actual customers. For us, that kind of manifests in a few different key moments or key places where we bring data. So trial experience, we have a team of inbound SDRs that are reaching out to some of our trial signups that if they meet firmographic, like employee size criteria, for example, and we'll supplement the lead object and the contact object and kind of like have some custom objects as well, but with a lot of product usage data, things that they've done in Retool, if they've actually played with the app, if they've connected data to it, some valuable stuff, mainly for the SDRs to contextualize their outreach to the potential customers and the trial signups, just show that we are not just treating them like cookie cutter, like, hey, thanks for signing up, what are you doing type of things. So that's like one part of it. The other part is showcasing this data to the AEs and the customer success managers around like health score, for example, or usage type of metrics to be like, hey, here are people that are declining usage month over month or not building as many apps in Retool, and have CSMs be able to proactively get ahead of those conversations and try and mitigate that, understand what's going on, help unblock people, etc. And then the last piece is like help AEs seeing the opposite, people growing, people use a lot more, see if you can expand teams, understand more use cases that people may or may not be considering. So it's all with the customer in mind. So any kind of data that maps to those to unlocking those more thoughtful conversations, that's kind of where I first start.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. Specifically, like I would work backwards, like take this as an opportunity to like build a relationship with your SDR team or your AE team, because to put it bluntly, it doesn't matter like what insights you find, it's only going to be as valuable as the execution and the go-to-market like motion, right? You can strike oil, but if you don't have the combustion engine to follow up on all this data that you have, it's not going to be worthwhile. So like we have a similar setup. We got inbound SDRs following up on trials, but if their current training, if their current enablement doesn't really reference like the in-app experience, like you want to, and Trevor kind of hinted at it, you want to kind of crawl, walk, run, right? Get the SDRs used to like referencing like the in-app activity, referencing like the in-app like experience, and then you can start to invest more, both operational resources, dollar amounts, tool investments into finding out what are the right product insights, and then that'll be like the next step for an SDR to become that much more potent in following up on some of this, following up on some of these insights that you're finding. Same thing can be said for the marketing team, right? If this isn't a territory that would be appropriate for a sales team, marketing needs the same kind of training wheels on how do we go from our vanilla email marketing drips to starting to fully understand what these key product insights mean and why is my ops team bring this to my attention? Like, how does this correlate with some of these self-serve trends that we've seen with our existing trial, with our existing trial experience?
I would agree with that. I feel like the empathy piece is huge. Like from my ops team, I constantly have them like listening to chorus calls or like joining calls and seeing like what is the problem that the issue that the customer is having, and what's the issue our rep is having. And there's like one piece of it from like an ops side where you're so used to hearing it from the rep or from the rep's manager or from the CSM manager, whatever it may be. You forget, like to Jake's point, what the customer even wants. Like, what is the issue? What is the problem? And like when you can see that full picture, all of this gets so much simpler. I think you can really like put two and two together. Like, okay, this usage leads to this, and the next action is this. Like when we were starting, like the big thing for us was like trying to figure out what is the next action, and like what does it take to get that next action to take place. And like working backwards is like a perfect way to say that, of like what is our end goal out of this, and like what needs to go well for that all to take place. And then you can drive each one of those actions to take place based on those 2 or 3 criteria that you just laid out. So I think like that's how I have my team look at it. We're not the perfect group to look at, but we find a lot of success in the empathy version of this.
I think piggybacking on that, just adding a little bit to that, is also thinking about, like product milestones, like what's valuable to you and as a company may not always be the most valuable milestone to a customer or someone exploring the product. Just an example, a Retool is, we're an internal app building software, so you need to connect some sort of database to Retool to actually build an app. And that action of connecting a database, Postgres, DynamoDB, MongoDB, et cetera, is super valuable to us internally because it's like, oh, cool, these people actually have intent to build. There's higher, likely to convert to a paying customer. However, for our onboarding experience, we push people to connect a database before they really understand the key usage and power of the tool. It may actually have the opposite effect, where it's like, unless there are some people that just kind of get Retool right away and they're like, oh yeah, I just can't do this. But there are other people that are like, well, how is this different from other competitors? What's the real value behind this? And so understanding, what's the value, what's the milestone to get those people really on board so they can then actually take connecting a database is a no-brainer for them and valuable for us.
That's interesting. What do you find as like the gate that opens that is like the one driver that allows them to connect? Like what is the knowledge milestone that they have to pass before they get to this place where they're setting up their Redshift or their Postgres?
It's a very timely question. We're actually currently experimenting with our onboarding flow. I mean, this is all just based on onboarding flow experimentation and whatnot. But one of the things we're starting to do is ask more for, get more first party data. It's not enough to see someone, sign up, give us their email, first name and last name, and they're like, pick a subdomain. Because with Clearbit, you can see like, oh, cool, this person's a software engineer at Slack, or like a product manager at a larger company. But really, Retool is tricky because we're a low code, not a no code. So you need to have some sort of coding experience. So we're experimenting right now, asking point blank, like, what's your experience with JavaScript and writing code? And then based on that, we're planning in the future to have a more tailored onboarding experience. We also have different experiences where you can start, instead of just, the boilerplate, you sign up, you finish the flow, and then you just get dumped into the Retool platform. We're going to experiment more so having gates in front of that, being like, hey, are you ready to start building? Do you already know what you're doing? Are you just someone who's used Retool and you're at a new company now? Like, go right ahead. Are you someone that wants to just see like a video walkthrough of the product? Are you someone that wants to start with a template? Maybe like if, an example would be like a fintech company that wants to build like fraud monitoring software. We have a template for that. So we're starting to kind of figure out how to like ease and better separate people in the upfront, so we can, some of the people that are, so tailor the experience in a more thoughtful way that way.
Yeah, I like that. I like dropping the videos is probably big too, of like, hey, you reached this, looks like you're going to set this up. Here's a few videos on like do's and don'ts.
I see one question here. What's your educational sequence for those knowledge?
What is it, like educational mean? Like for educational customers, or for education like to deliver in terms of collateral to the customers?
I think what I meant by this is I was just keying off your knowledge milestone terms. I think that was you. I love that. I'm going to totally steal that, by the way. So if you ever see that, I know exactly where it came from, Trevor.
Yeah, that's funny.
Just sort of like, so you've got your customer, and they got to be educated on the use of your product, no matter if it's technical or non-technical, because people are going to be like, what the hell is this thing? I don't know how to use it. Do you have a set piece to say, okay, they need these 3 classes, or they have this level of expertise, and okay, milestone 1 hit, and then we got to get them to milestone 2, milestone 3. Because it seems to me, and I've used a bunch of these sort of tools as just a user, that boy, getting up to speed and being productive can be a bear. And I get frustrated and be like, forget it. I won't use it anymore. Especially when the free trial thing, right? Like, oh, it's free. I just, I don't care, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think patience is like the #1 game in this whole thing. Is like the people that are signing up today, we're not expecting them to be paying customers tomorrow. Like, and we're not really expecting them to be paying customers in 6 months either. Like, either they're going to use this and like it, or they're not, I think is like something you got to be comfortable with. Obviously you can sway that in a lot of different ways, of like, we do a thing every week where like every Monday we pop up a pop-up that says everything that we've shipped this weekend or this week, like all the changes, all the improvements. Like, I'm not sure if you used Miro before, but it's basically just like a whiteboard online. So if we added more templates, like we'll push that like right at the beginning, like when you log in, so you can see everything that's improved. But like in terms of like pushing knowledge, like one of the things like that we drive off of is like sharing of the boards that you've created. That means that like other people are now interested in what you've now worked on. So that's a big indicator for us. So like we would like, if we notice that you've shared 5 boards in the last few days, we would then drop like an email to you of like, hey, did you know that there's integrations available, but integrations are on the next plan. They're not on the plan that they're on. So like while you're doing this sharing, did you also know that, hey, you use Asana internally, like we could integrate with Asana and you could just do this all in one place? Like, and then we maybe send that to his manager as well too, or like the buying lead there, and get both those emails out. Like when we talked about like hiring, you don't really need a sales rep to do that. You just need one person to kind of setting things up in sales loft or outreach to do that. So that's a success that we've had. I don't know, others probably have had other help.
I can give a little color context. We're in that, definitely that crawl phase of this stuff. Like, you know, we're in the midst of kind of revamping our onboarding experience and tailoring the rest of the kind of ancillary components as such. So email drips are the big piece that I've worked on personally, which is, you know, taking that technical versus non-technical, having the user journey a little bit more defined for each of these. So if you're non-technical, you know, we have courses you could take, for example, or we want to share what customers are doing just to give you some inspiration to see like, hey, maybe I'm not the best person to build, but I'll invite my, you know, my engineering colleague who is more technical, things like that. Ultimately, we really want, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about this, but I really would love to have, you know, I think the set piece thing, or the just kind of having different pieces in play here. The product onboarding is the centerpiece. You know, that's where you use to kind of suss out what people are doing, how technical they are, if they're, you know, if they're going to be kind of set up for success or not, and then being able to add in more ancillary touch points, being able to, you know, nurture them with more emails if they may need it, or if they know what they're doing, get out of their way and don't bombard them with stuff that just kind of is spam, that can be seen as spammy. Also leveraging people. That's where SDRs could come in. Maybe, you know, if someone is maybe not the right firmographic fit, but is doing really high value actions, you know, maybe inviting technical teammates or something, just bring humans in to actually, hey, like, hey, do you have a use case in mind? Let's unpack that. There's a lot of stuff that we're kind of exploring. Trevor, you're definitely a lot more mature than we are with it, but that's kind of aspiration where we want to get to as well.
Yeah, one of the things we do along the way too is just offering for a human to be involved. Not like peppering them with the human involvement, but just like, you know, you sign up to use the product, we'll send you like the welcome email that gets you access into it. And like, if you want to set up time, here's our calendar. Not like, oh, send over times and make this a difficult process, but just here's our calendar. If you want to talk for 30 minutes, you can have a human. The other way that we do it over at Correlated is, I mean, obviously we're going to dog food our own product, right? So like we'll kick off an outreach sequence based on actions people took or didn't take in the product. And so that's a good way for us to kind of get involved and have like a one-to-one conversation with people too. So based on if they invited more people or, you know, tried different features or, you know, created certain amount of signals in our product, we might, you know, kick off a sequence to them in that way. You can have a human. Take one.
We don't have many, but we do give them out to the right people. That's the other piece too, is like you determine that like, okay, you get a human to keep going down this joke, but like, how does that human get ready for that conversation? Like, how do they have like a list of the usage, a list of where it's been shared, where like a org chart of this customer out of your firmographic tool and see like where that usage is gone? Like, that's almost what they need to be successful. So if you're not ready to give them that, then you're not ready to really give a human.
Good point. All right, let's kick it into the next one. So we have the data we need, right? We've thought about the use case for it. We've thought about when we kind of want to bring in that data. So how do we get that data to the right people and at the right time? I guess kicking this off, Jan, I know you and I had a brief conversation before we got on here about enablement. Do you want to kind of kick off the conversation here?
Yeah, for sure. It's again reminiscent to my like last comment, but like pretend you're in ops if you're not, and like be selfish for a bit, right? There's a lot of work you need to do to pipe this data into your CRM or your marketing automation platform. the last thing you want to do is like spend these hours, spend like tool investment, and like have this work just fall on its face, right? Because like whether you're SDR, CSM, or a marketing manager that's like, managing email drips, like you need context of like what do these different like signals mean, and especially if you're trying to complement a sales go to market, you need to again exercise that kind of empathy that SDR and AE would require, because as Breezy you mentioned at the beginning of the call, like there's basically kind of preconceived motion that like PLG is antagonistic to a sales motion when really it isn't, and it doesn't have to be. Everything that we've described so far is really about, if it's not marketing or product helping encourage a user down the call it adoption of the trial, it's really about augmenting the SDR or the CSM or the AE with the right data and giving a sense of what can you expect from this lead or from this account now that we've seen like the product signal that is the connected integration. All right, you need to know that you'll probably have a conversation about our business or our enterprise plans rather than your out of the box use cases. Or if you see product signals like, hey, this person added a new workspace to their existing account or to their trial experience, that's more context of like, how does that relate to the different plans or the different like feature sets an SDR or CSM needs to sell to? So like the word for this is all enablement. If you have an enablement team to partner with, that's a great boon. But you want to make sure, again, as an operator, it's your responsibility to make sure that the work that you're putting in, it's not for nothing, and it gets the right, you can milk the right value out of it by making sure your end users, the SDRs, the marketers, or the CSMs, they know exactly how to use this data and like why it's important and why we're putting all this work into piping it into our Salesforce, our Salesloft, or HubSpot.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything Jan just said. I mean, kind of to answer this in a more like, you know, like broad way is like, just back to empathy, customer empathy here is the way to answer this question. Most people in MOps or ops in general, especially myself, you have two types of customers. You've got the, you know, the external customers that are recipients of your work, like be it an email onboarding drip. And then a lot of the systems work, you have to think about your internal stakeholders and customers and be empathetic to them, really understand. You know, I think one of the mistakes I made earlier in my career was as a marketing ops, you know, builder is just building the system first and then kind of trying to shoehorn the people in after the fact. And it's not to say I built a bad system, but they weren't good. You know, they weren't, the people weren't, you know, set up in the right way. It's just that there was a lack of, you know, empathy, bringing them along for the ride. So I think to Jan's major point here, the most important thing you can do to get the right, to figure out what the right data is and get it to them is just talk to people, understand, you know, like your SDRs or your CSMs, your A's are the boots on the ground. They're talking to customers every day. See what they, you know, what do they want first and foremost, and how are they working in a way, and where are they looking, so you can actually figure out, you know, it makes it a lot easier to figure out, okay, great, instead of getting, you know, 50 data points, they only care about 10. Let's get those in there, and they only want to see them in Salesforce on the contact object, and they only want, and it only needs to be piped in once per day. Talking to the people first makes this a lot more kind of manageable of a task than just kind of looking at the other way around and just saying like, I've got this massive data, you know, kind of ocean. Where do I start?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like depending on who, like from a PLG perspective, there's different people as well that you're reaching out to in different sets in the flow. So if it's like your new logo, your first time like doing business with them, there's like, I think a certain set of actions that need to be delivered to that account executive, like whether it's in the contact object or wherever it may be. But I think like from the account manager's perspective, like when you're just trying to expand these accounts, like, well, to Jake's point, like the weekly dump of data of like, here's what happened in your accounts in the last week, and like, here's a few actions we recommend based on that, can go a long way as your ops team is a little bit smaller and you're looking to inflict change or inflict expansion revenue for your team. That's something we had a ton of success with, was like sending those weekly reports of usage in the product. and like calling out kind of who were the power users in there and setting up opportunities for them based on those contacts.
Yeah, I think like the goal here that we're all trying to achieve is like reaching the right person, at the right time, with the right message, right? So it's in this statement even really brings it back to that idea of the customer, of empathy, of all the words we've been sort of repeating across here. So, this data not only enables your team to be more effective in their roles, but it enables a better experience for your customer too, because otherwise the only way to reach out if you don't have this data is to just ask them what they might need or this, and you're reaching out blindly. And that's not going to be a good experience, for anyone on your team doing that outreach, because they don't have context for what they're reaching out about. And it's not going to be a good experience for your customer or for your user either, because no one wants, like, you're like, I'm using your product, like figure it out, And so I think the importance of this data is to be able to have those conversations that actually add value to your end user.
I think
The other thing too, we haven't really, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I think the other thing too to consider through this is, as you talk to your end users, your internal end users, to understand what the right data is. It's hard, but I think the really powerful thing is to not have preconceived notions about what they may think is valuable, and if it's like easy to get, hard to get, if it's complicated, simple. Like an example here at Retool is we'll have AEs that will own some self-serve customer accounts, just kind of for upselling purposes. And one of the things that they told me early on was like, hey, it'd be really great to know whenever a new person signs up for this account, like a new editor signs up for the account. And I was like, it seems like a really straightforward thing. Like, I'm happy to do it, built it, and took a matter of 30 minutes to build that, set that up. The team was really happy about it, and then we kind of never really followed up. It's one of those things where you don't really stamp like attribution on it. And I followed up with people on the team, just by happenstance, like, are these valuable? And people are like, oh my god, these are hugely valuable for driving upsells, because you catch someone right as they get invited, you catch them really early, they're like really in the moment thinking about Retool. They can offer them, the AE is able to position themselves as a build partner here. So one of those things was like, oh, I don't know if that's, I personally wouldn't have thought that was valuable, but talking to the team, not having a preconceived notion of saying like, I don't think this is valuable, just kind of erring on the side of like bias to action, just let's do it. If it's not valuable, we take it away. This is something that I found really valuable too.
Yeah, like we're operators. Like we have maybe a good guess of who the right person, right time, and right message are. But like I would fully expect our AEs, our SDRs, our marketers, the ones interfacing with our external customers, to know better, to be the experts here. So like part of good requirements gathering is just what do your internal customers need? Like what kind of data does your marketing team think would be valuable? Because they're going to be more of an expert than probably myself, because they actually talk to the customers more often than I do. So if the goal here is to reach the right person, right time, right message, again, we have a good guess, but the people talking to your external customers will know better.
And the only other thing I have to say is completely different than all this, but it's like we've kind of been talking about marketing and sales this whole time, but the product can be huge for feedback for your product, but B, like for your support org, like how quickly can you take in like the support question that they raised, and how quickly can you get that to your support team or to your CS team, and how quickly can they go back to the customer? Like can all that happen in 2 hours? Is 1 hour realistic? Like when you're growing like that, it's a huge leveler up on your competition. Jake, maybe that's something for you to think about too. But like how quickly can you respond to the inquiries or to the reach outs, or like when product requests happen, like through the product, how can you get that into Salesforce and funnel that to the product team? So when they're working on it, how can you then tell the CSM to reach back out and say, hey, this is being worked on. Actually, would you be interested in being a beta customer? Those little things, all the data is right there. That's what helps you win and against all the competition.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's getting hit on here, and as we move into this last topic here on how and when to act on these insights, is thinking about the buying process. So I tossed this slide in here. I wasn't sure if I'd talk to it, but I actually think it's going to be helpful in the context of this conversation. So if you look at the right side of this, from where you see onboarding and they take an action in the product. In the PLG world, it's all about these expansion opportunities. So in the past, right, it was like, okay, they have, they may become in as an MQL, we work them, they, become an SQL, they are now a customer, and like the deal's closed and that's the end. But in PLG, that's almost where it all begins. When someone's onboarded into the product, whether they're paying or not, and now we have an opportunity to expand with them and cross-sell them or upsell them or whatever, fits for your exact product. And so I think that's one of the big differences that happens in this PLG world, is that that's kind of where the conversation begins. And there's over and over and over, you kind of go through this buying cycle. It's not just one buying cycle and like maybe we revisit it in like, after a year or 2 years or whatever the contract says. So thinking about when to reach out based on this product usage data, Jan, I'm gonna pass it over to you, and thinking about expansion and post sale and all those good things. I don't know if you want to kind of jump in with some thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, like when we look at this, like basically this loop that you have here between onboarded and expands, at least with the post sales funnel, it can be very obvious like what that loop looks like, especially if you have like an annual contract and like a renewal cycle. I mean, that's what we have at PandaDoc. So like when we look at renewals and when we look at the post-sales funnel, you want to make sure that the CSMs or the AM teams that are in charge of expansion and retention, they have the data that gives the context of how that customer has been basically living through that renewal cycle. So for an explicit example, like we have just very, very basic metrics of like, hey, how many seats that the customer paid for, how many of them are active? And by active, we can define that as a product team. At PandaDoc, it would be they're creating and sending documents. Do we see that active seat capacity maxed out 30 days, 60 days, 90 days leading into the renewal? If not, is there a risk for churn? And then if you have like the human capital for it, you can like pull all that data into like basically call it a trend analysis of like our current customer accounts. Like what are the signals that can indicate a churn risk, or more positively, what are the signals that can indicate an expansion opportunity? So that way, again, you're augmenting your CSMs, your AMs with the right prioritization, because as Jake, you were the one that said it, it's a whole data ocean and it can easily be TMI. So if you think of, again, when to reach out based on like these product signals, try to complement it with what your internal customers are using. And if you're an AM, if you're a CSM, that renewal date is a very obvious time and place. If you have trials and if you're pre-sale, I know at PandaDoc we have like a 14-day trial. So when comes like midway through the trial and you're not seeing the right activity, same thing. Like, can you augment your SDR or your marketing team? Like, hey, this person isn't logging in, or maybe they are logging in, but they have no idea what to do. That can help guide the when component for how to use these different data, these different product signals that you're gathering.
Ton of sense. All right, I know we are just about at the end here. Trevor, Jake, any sort of closing thoughts here?
No, this was fun. I hope everyone got something out of this. I did for sure. So thank you for putting this on.
Yeah, likewise, really enjoyed it. Breezy, thanks for hosting everyone, and yeah, enjoyed the conversation.
All right, awesome. Well, if anybody has any last burning questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I see a couple thanks yous in there and others who dropped off early. I think everyone's appreciative of the conversation. We'll follow up with a recording of this too, and toss it up on YouTube. So you're welcome to pass that around if it's helpful. But with that, I think we'll sign off 3 minutes early. Bye, everybody. Thanks for your help.
Bye, everyone.